I'll never forget the exact moment my heart shattered into a million pieces, standing in my daughter Hannah's marble foyer in Denver, my suitcases still in hand, as my son-in-law Richard Reynolds casually informed me that I wouldn't be comfortable staying for Thanksgiving. What he didn't know, as he practiced his rehearsed smile and talked about family space, was that I owned the investment firm that held the mortgage on their $500,000 house.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're a subscriber, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you.
Tell us a duh. And I was about to make some very interesting business decisions. But let me start from the beginning, because the betrayal that unfolded that November afternoon was years in the making. My name is Martha Bosch, and at 74 years old, I thought I understood family loyalty. I'd driven 8 hours from my home in Kansas City, my trunk loaded with homemade pecan pies, and carefully wrapped Christmas ornaments that had been in our family for 3 generations. The autumn leaves were just turning golden along the Colorado highways, and I'd spent the entire drive humming old hymns and planning the perfect holiday with my daughter Hannah and my 2 precious grandchildren, 7-year-old Connor and 5-year-old Marigold. Hannah and Richard lived in Cherry Hills Village, one of Denver's most exclusive neighborhoods, in a sprawling Tudor-style home with manicured gardens and a 3-car garage. The house had always seemed too large for their family of 4, but Richard insisted it was essential for business relationships and networking opportunities. At the time I'd thought it was just young ambition. Now I realize it was the first red flag I should have noticed. As I pulled into their circular driveway, that crisp Tuesday afternoon, I felt that familiar flutter of excitement that came with seeing my grandchildren. Connor had been sending me drawings of turkeys through the mail for weeks, and little Marigold had been practicing a dance she wanted to perform for Grandma Martha. These moments, these simple precious family moments, were what I lived for since my husband Walter passed away 3 years ago. But something felt wrong the moment I rang the doorbell. Richard answered the door instead of Hannah, which was unusual. He was impeccably dressed in one of his expensive suits, despite being home in the middle of the afternoon. His smile was too wide, too practiced, like the expression he wore when meeting potential business clients at the country club. "Martha," he said, not moving aside to let me enter. "You made good time." I stood there awkwardly, holding my purse and overnight bag, waiting for him to step back or call the children. Behind him I could see their pristine living room with its white furniture and crystal chandelier, everything perfectly arranged as if for a magazine photo shoot. "Where are my grandbabies?" I asked, trying to peer around him. "And Hannah? I brought those chocolate chip cookies Connor loves." Richard's smile faltered slightly. "Actually, Martha, we need to talk." "Come in, but..." "Well, there's been a change in plans." The way he said it, with that careful measured tone, made my stomach drop. I followed him into their formal living room, the one where the children weren't allowed to play because of the white upholstery. He gestured for me to sit on the pristine sofa while he remained standing, hands clasped behind his back like a businessman, delivering bad news to shareholders. "Where's Hannah?" I asked again, setting my purse down carefully on their glass coffee table. "She's at the grocery store," Richard replied, though something in his tone suggested this conversation had been planned for when she wasn't home. "Martha, I need to be direct with you. This Thanksgiving, well, we've decided it would be better if you stayed at a hotel." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what? A hotel?" he repeated, his tone becoming more firm. "There's a lovely Marriott about 20 minutes away. Very comfortable. We've had some development that make hosting overnight guests impractical right now." I looked around their 6-bedroom house, with its guest suite that had been specifically designed for my visits. The room where I'd stayed a dozen times, where I'd read bedtime stories to Connor and Marigold, where Hannah and I had spent late nights talking about everything and nothing. Richard, I don't understand. What developments? Is someone sick? Is there a problem with the house? He cleared his throat, adjusting his silk tie. It's complicated, Martha. Business matters. We're in the middle of some important transitions. Having extended family here right now would be disruptive to some delicate negotiations. Extended family. The phrase stung more than I expected. After helping raise Hannah, after being there for every milestone, every crisis, every celebration, I was now extended family. What about the children? I managed to ask. They've been so excited about Thanksgiving. Connor's been practicing that poem he wants to recite. Oh, you'll see them, Richard said quickly, as if he was being generous. We can arrange visits. Lunch somewhere neutral. Maybe that restaurant at the mall they like. But the house, well, it's just not feasible for overnight stays right now. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process what was happening. This was the same man who'd called me Mom Bosch for the first 5 years of his marriage to Hannah. The same man who'd asked me to co-sign their first apartment lease when they were newlyweds because his credit wasn't established. The same man who'd borrowed my car for job interviews and eaten Sunday dinners at my kitchen table every week. I see, I said quietly, though I didn't see it all. And Hannah agrees with this decision. Richard's pause was telling. Hannah understands the situation. She knows how important these business developments are for our family's future, which meant Hannah didn't know. Or if she did, she was being manipulated into accepting it. I stood up slowly, my 74-year-old knees protesting after the long drive. Well then, I suppose I should find this hotel you mentioned. I can give you the address, Richard offered, pulling out his phone with practiced efficiency. They have a lovely restaurant. You might even prefer the privacy. As he rattled off directions to the Marriott, I looked around their perfect living room with new eyes. Everything was for show. The expensive furniture, the designer decorations, the house itself. Even their family relationships were being curated for appearance rather than substance. What Richard didn't know, as he stood there in his tailored suit explaining why his wife's mother wasn't welcome in their home, was that I wasn't the helpless widow he'd apparently decided I was. What he couldn't have imagined was that the business developments he was so concerned about might be more connected to me than he'd ever dreamed. But I'd let him find that out later. For now I simply nodded, gathered my purse, and headed back to my car to drive to a hotel room alone. The real story was just beginning. As I drove through Denver's upscale streets toward the Marriott, my hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel, I couldn't help but think about how we'd gotten to this point. The relationship between Richard and me hadn't always been this cold, this calculated. In fact, there was a time when I genuinely believed he loved Hannah, and by extension our family. I met Richard Reynolds 8 years ago, when Hannah brought him home for Easter dinner. She was 26 then, working as a marketing coordinator for a small nonprofit, and absolutely glowing with new love. Richard was charming, handsome in that clean-cut way that made church ladies nod approvingly, and he had an easy laugh that filled my kitchen during that first visit. "Mom, he's different," Hannah had whispered to me while we prepared the ham. "He has real ambitions, plans, he's going to build something important." Richard was 28, fresh out of business school, and full of grand ideas about real estate development and investment opportunities. He spoke passionately about transforming Denver's downtown corridor, about creating luxury living spaces for young professionals. His enthusiasm was infectious, and Walter and I found ourselves charmed by his vision and his obvious devotion to our daughter. The red flags started small, so small that I dismissed them as generational differences, or the natural adjustment period of a young man joining an established family. There was the way Richard always seemed to steer conversations toward money, not directly, but through comments about smart investments and building wealth. He'd compliment Walter on our comfortable retirement, asking detailed questions about our financial advisor and investment strategies.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
At the time, I thought he was simply being respectful, wanting to understand how successful families manage their resources. Then there were the subtle corrections. When Hannah would mention her childhood memories of our modest ranch house in Kansas City, Richard would smile and say things like, "That's so charming, honey. Such a different world from what we're building together." Or when I'd talk about my 30 years teaching elementary school, he'd nod politely and add, "Teaching is so noble. Of course, the real money is in private sector innovation." But the most telling moments came during their wedding planning. Hannah and Richard had been engaged for 8 months when they started discussing venues. Hannah showed me pictures of a lovely local country club with reasonable rates and beautiful gardens. The next week, Richard had somehow convinced her that they needed something more appropriate for our professional network. "Mom," Hannah called me one evening, her voice strained. "Richard found this amazing venue at the Denver Athletic Club. It's where all the city's business leaders hold their events. But it's significantly more expensive than we planned." I remember sitting in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, hearing the worry in my daughter's voice. "How much more, sweetheart?" "About 15,000 more. But Richard says it's an investment in our future. The connections we'll make, the impression it will leave on his business associates." Walter and I had always planned to contribute to Hannah's wedding, but we'd budgeted for something reasonable, something that matched our middle-class means. That night, we talked it over and decided to dip into our savings to cover the extra cost. We wanted Hannah's day to be perfect, and if this venue mattered to Richard's career, we could make it work. That 15,000 became 25,000 when Richard decided they needed upgraded floral arrangements to match the venue's elegance. Then it became 35,000 when the catering minimums required more expensive menu options. "It's just this once," Richard assured us during a tense family dinner. "After the wedding, I'll be positioned to land the Henderson account. That alone will more than cover these investments." Walter, ever the gentle diplomat, simply nodded and wrote another check. But I caught him later that evening, sitting at his desk with a calculator, quietly reorganizing our retirement budget to accommodate Richard's escalating demands. The Henderson account never materialized. Neither did the Morrison project Richard had been guaranteed or the exclusive development deal with the City Planning Committee. There was always another opportunity just around the corner, another connection that would change everything, another investment that required just a little more capital to get off the ground. When Hannah got pregnant with Connor 2 years later, Richard insisted they needed to move out of their starter apartment. "We can't raise a child in a place like this," he declared, gesturing around their perfectly adequate 2-bedroom unit. "What would people think?" The house hunting began immediately. Richard had very specific requirements: prestigious neighborhood, impressive curb appeal, space for entertaining business contacts. Hannah wanted something cozy and affordable. Richard won. The down payment on the Cherry Hills Village house was $60,000. Richard's contribution was $12,000. Hannah had saved $18,000 from her nonprofit salary. That left $30,000, which Richard delicately suggested could be a family investment in their future. "Think of it as investing in Connor's future," Richard explained during another kitchen conversation that I was beginning to dread. "Property values in Cherry Hills never depreciate. This isn't just a house, it's a legacy." Walter and I liquidated a significant portion of our savings account to provide that $30,000, telling ourselves it was an early inheritance, a gift to help our daughter start her family in security. But the request didn't stop there. When Connor started preschool, it had to be the elite Montessori academy that cost more per year than Hannah's first car. When they needed furniture for the house, it had to be from the designer showrooms where Richard's business contacts shopped. When Hannah's aging Honda became unreliable, Richard convinced her they needed something that projected success, a luxury SUV with payments that strained their budget. Each time, Richard presented these expenses as investments in their family's future, as necessary steps toward the lifestyle Hannah deserved. And each time, when their budget came up short, there was a careful conversation about how family support could bridge the gap. Walter noticed the pattern before I did. About 6 months before he passed away, he started asking uncomfortable questions about Richard's actual income versus their spending patterns. He requested copies of their mortgage statements and credit card bills, ostensibly to help with their financial planning. What he found troubled him deeply. "Martha," he told me one evening, his voice heavy with concern, "I think we need to have a serious conversation about Hannah and Richard's situation. The numbers don't add up." But Walter's health began declining rapidly, and those conversations kept getting postponed for more pressing medical concerns. By the time he passed away, I was too consumed with grief and the logistics of being newly widowed to pursue his financial concerns. Now, sitting in the Marriott parking lot in Denver, staring at the hotel where I'd been exiled from my own family's Thanksgiving, I finally understood what Walter had been trying to tell me. Richard had been systematically using our family's resources to fund a lifestyle he couldn't afford, and I had been too trusting, too loving, too naive to see it happening. But that was about to change. The Marriott hotel room was generic and cold, beige walls, standard corporate artwork, and a single window that overlooked the parking lot instead of the Colorado mountains I'd hoped to see with my grandchildren. I sat on the edge of the queen-sized bed, still in my traveling clothes, staring at my phone as it displayed Hannah's contact information. My finger hovered over the call button for nearly 10 minutes before I finally found the courage to dial. "Mom," Hannah's voice sounded artificially bright when she answered. "Richard said you decided to stay at the hotel. How lovely, is it nice?" The forced cheerfulness in her tone told me everything I needed to know. She was trying to convince herself as much as me that this arrangement was normal, reasonable, even preferable. "It's fine, sweetheart," I replied, though my voice caught slightly on the words. "The room is adequate." "Oh good, and you know this might actually work out better. You'll have your own space, your own bathroom. No grandchildren waking you up at 6 in the morning." Her laugh sounded hollow, rehearsed. I wanted to tell her that being awakened by Connor and Marigold's excited whispers on Thanksgiving morning was one of my greatest joys. That I'd been looking forward to making pancakes in her kitchen while wearing my old robe, to helping little Marigold pick out her dress for dinner, to listening to Connor practice his turkey poem one more time. Instead, I simply said, "When can I see them?" A pause. "Well, tomorrow is going to be quite busy with preparations. Richard has some business associates coming for dinner, the Hammers and the Montes. You remember them from the country club. They're very important connections for his development projects." I didn't remember them, because I'd never been included in Richard's business social circle. Another small exclusion I'd overlooked until now. "But Friday," Hannah continued quickly, "we could meet for lunch somewhere. Maybe that family restaurant near the mall. The one with the playground." Friday, I was being relegated to a 2-hour lunch slot at a chain restaurant instead of spending 4 days creating memories in the family home I'd helped them afford. "That sounds lovely," I managed, though tears were starting to blur my vision. "Tell the children Grandma Martha misses them. Of course, they're so excited to see you. Connor keeps asking when you're coming over." But not excited enough to override Richard's mysterious business developments, apparently. After hanging up, I sat in the silence of my hotel room and let myself cry properly for the first time. Not the dignified tears I'd shed at Walter's funeral, but raw, angry sobs that came from somewhere deep in my chest. I cried for the Thanksgiving traditions that were being sacrificed for Richard's networking opportunities. I cried for my grandchildren, who were learning that Grandma Martha could be easily dismissed when convenient. Most of all, I cried for Hannah, who was slowly losing herself in Richard's world of appearances and social climbing. The next morning, Thanksgiving Day, was perhaps the loneliest I'd experienced since Walter's death. I ordered room service breakfast, choking down rubbery eggs and tasteless coffee while watching the Macy's parade on the hotel television. The families on screen looked so happy, so connected, that I finally had to turn it off. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a text from Hannah. "Having such a wonderful day, wish you were here." When my phone rang, Connor's sweet voice filled the hotel room like sunshine. "Grandma, when are you coming over? Daddy said you're staying at a hotel like we're on vacation." "That's right, sweetheart. How's your Thanksgiving going?" "It's okay, but there are lots of boring grown-ups here and Marigold and I have to stay upstairs most of the time because Daddy says we're too loud for his meetings." Meetings. On Thanksgiving Day, while my grandchildren were banished to their rooms like inconvenient interruptions. "Did you get to eat turkey?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice light. "A little bit, but we had to eat in the kitchen because the dining room is for the important people. Mommy said maybe tomorrow we can have real Thanksgiving with your stuffing." Before I could respond, I heard Richard's voice in the background. "Connor, that's enough phone time. Come help your sister clean up her toys." "I have to go, Grandma. Daddy says we're being too loud again." Attached was a photo of their dining room table, elegantly set with Hannah's grandmother's china, the china I'd given her when she got married. Richard was visible in the background, arms spread wide as he entertained well-dressed guests I didn't recognize. I stared at that photo for a long time, noting how Hannah looked beautiful but tense, how the children were nowhere to be seen in the frame. This wasn't the warm family gathering I'd envisioned. It was a business performance masquerading as a holiday celebration. 2 hours later, another text, "Connor wants to call Grandma Martha." When my phone rang, Connor's sweet voice filled the hotel room like sunshine. "Grandma, when are you coming over? Daddy said you're staying at a hotel like we're on vacation." "That's right, sweetheart. How's your Thanksgiving going?" "It's okay, but there are lots of boring grown-ups here, and Marigold and I have to stay upstairs most of the time because Daddy says we're too loud for his meetings." Meetings. On Thanksgiving Day, while my grandchildren were banished to their rooms like inconvenient interruptions. "Did you get to eat turkey?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice light. "A little bit, but we had to eat in the kitchen because the dining room is for the important people. Mommy said maybe tomorrow we can have real Thanksgiving with your stuffing." Before I could respond, I heard Richard's voice in the background. "Connor, that's enough phone time. Come help your sister clean up her toys." "I have to go, Grandma. Daddy says we're being too loud again." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in the oppressive silence of the hotel room. That evening I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just 24 hours earlier. Instead of ordering another lonely room service meal, I drove to a local diner that advertised traditional Thanksgiving dinner all day. The restaurant was half empty, filled mostly with other displaced souls, elderly people without family nearby, workers pulling holiday shifts, travelers stranded by flight delays. I ordered turkey with all the fixings and found myself sitting next to an elderly gentleman named Frank who was spending Thanksgiving alone because his daughter lived in Seattle and couldn't afford to visit. "Family's complicated," Frank said simply when I explained why I was there. "Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest." His words stayed with me as I returned to the hotel that night. I lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of traffic, thinking about the 8-hour drive I'd made with such hope just 2 days ago. Friday's lunch at the family restaurant was bittersweet. Connor and Marigold were excited to see me, chattering about their Thanksgiving and showing me drawings they'd made. But Hannah looked exhausted, and there was a brittleness to her smile that worried me. She kept checking her phone, mentioning that Richard was having an important conference call that afternoon. When our 2 hours were up, the children's tears as I said goodbye nearly broke my resolve to maintain dignity in this impossible situation. "Can't you come home with us, Grandma?" Marigold asked, clinging to my leg. "My room has a bed for you." "Not today, sweetheart," I whispered, kneeling to hug her tight, "but I'll see you again soon." As I watched them drive away, Hannah waving from the driver's seat while the children pressed their faces to the back window, I realized that something fundamental had shifted inside me. The lonely drive back to Kansas City gave me 8 hours to think, to plan, and to make some very important decisions about how I was going to handle Richard Reynolds going forward. He had made his choice about my place in this family. Now it was time for me to make mine. 3 weeks after my humiliating Thanksgiving exile, I was back in my Kansas City home, trying to find a new normal in the wake of what felt like a family earthquake. The house seemed quieter than usual, and I found myself checking my phone obsessively for calls or texts from Hannah that rarely came. When they did arrive, they were brief and felt obligatory, updates about the children's activities, mentions of Richard's work projects, but nothing substantial, nothing that invited real conversation. I'd just finished my morning coffee and was settling in to read when my phone rang. Richard's name appeared on the screen, which was unusual. In 8 years of marriage to my daughter, Richard had called me directly perhaps a dozen times, and never just to chat. "Martha," his voice was warm, almost effusive. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." The sudden charm in his tone immediately put me on guard. This was the same voice he used when asking Walter and me to contribute to the wedding venue upgrade, the same calculated friendliness that preceded every request for financial assistance. "Not at all, Richard. Is everything all right? Are Hannah and the children okay?" "Oh, they're wonderful. Actually, that's partly why I'm calling. Hannah has been talking about how much she missed having you for Thanksgiving. She feels terrible about the miscommunication. Miscommunication. As if my exile to a hotel had been some sort of scheduling error rather than a deliberate exclusion." "I see," I replied carefully. "How is Hannah feeling about things?" "Well, you know Hannah, she's so sensitive, so family-oriented. She's been quite upset about how everything played out. Between you and me, Martha, I think she blames herself for not handling the situation better. The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced. Make Hannah feel guilty for Richard's decision, then position himself as the reasonable mediator trying to fix things. Richard, Hannah has nothing to feel guilty about," I said firmly. "The decision to have me stay at a hotel was yours, not hers." A brief pause, then a self-deprecating chuckle. "You're absolutely right, Martha. I handled that poorly. I was under enormous pressure with some business developments, and I made a decision that hurt you and the family. I owe you an apology." This was new. In 8 years I'd never heard Richard admit fault about anything. Warning bells were ringing in my head, but I let him continue. "The truth is," he went on, his voice dropping to a more confidential tone, "I've been dealing with some incredible opportunities that required absolute discretion. Potential investors, you understand. Sometimes these high-level business negotiations require, well, a certain environment." "What kind of opportunities?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew where this conversation was heading. "That's actually the exciting part, Martha. You know, I've been working toward that downtown development project for years. Well, it's finally happening. We've secured the preliminary agreements with the City Planning Commission, and we're moving into the investor phase. His voice was gaining enthusiasm, the practiced pitch of a salesman warming to his topic. This isn't just any development, Martha. We're talking about a mixed-use complex that will transform Denver's skyline. Luxury condominiums, high-end retail, office space for Fortune 500 companies. The profit potential is, well, it's life-changing. I remained silent, letting him build to whatever request was coming. The thing is, Richard continued, this level of opportunity requires substantial capital investment. We're not talking about small-time residential properties anymore. This is major league development, the kind that creates generational wealth. Generational wealth. The phrase was clearly chosen to appeal to my concern for Connor and Marigold's future. I'm sure Hannah is excited about your prospects, I said neutrally. Oh, she is. But Martha, here's where I could really use your wisdom and, well, your support. His tone shifted slightly, becoming more vulnerable, more personal. The investors require each partner to demonstrate significant financial backing. It's not enough to have good credit or steady income. They want to see substantial assets, real liquidity. And there it was. What exactly are you asking me, Richard? Well, I was hoping you might consider co-signing for the investment loan. It's just a formality, really. The project is guaranteed to succeed. We have letters of intent from major tenants, city approval, everything lined up perfectly. Your signature would simply demonstrate the family's financial stability to satisfy the investor's requirements. I had to admire the packaging. He wasn't asking me to risk my retirement savings. He was asking me to help demonstrate family financial stability. He wasn't requesting a handout. This was an investment opportunity with guaranteed returns. How much of a loan are we discussing? I asked. $2.8 million, he said quickly, as if the figure was insignificant. But Martha, understand, this isn't really a risk. The profit projections show a minimum 300% return within 18 months. We're talking about turning that investment into $8 or $9 million. $2.8 million. Against my teacher's pension and Social Security income. The audacity was breathtaking. Richard, that's an enormous amount of money. What happens if something goes wrong with the project? Nothing will go wrong, he insisted, his voice taking on a slight edge before he caught himself and returned to the warm, persuasive tone. But even if there were unexpected delays, the underlying assets would more than cover the loan amount. Real estate in Denver never depreciates, especially not in premium locations like this. I thought about Walter's concerns, about the pattern of escalating requests, about the $30,000 we'd already contributed to their house down payment that had never been repaid or even acknowledged as a loan. This is quite sudden, Richard. When would you need an answer? Well, that's the thing. The investor meeting is next week, and they'll want to see all the financial documentation in place. If we could get the paperwork started this weekend, we'd be positioned perfectly for the final approval process. This weekend. Less than a week to decide whether to risk nearly $3 million on Richard's latest scheme. And Hannah supports this plan? I asked. Absolutely. She's thrilled about the opportunity for Connor and Marigold's future. Private schools, college funds, family vacations. This project will provide everything we've dreamed of for our children. But something in his tone suggested Hannah might not be quite as informed about this plan as he claimed. Richard, I appreciate you thinking of me for this opportunity, but I'll need time to consider such a significant commitment. I'll want to review the project details, speak with my financial advisor, perhaps even consult with an attorney. The warmth in his voice cooled noticeably. Of course, Martha. Though I hope you understand that timing is critical in opportunities like this. The investor group won't wait indefinitely. I understand. Give me until next Friday to review everything properly. Next Friday might be cutting it close, he said. a hint of pressure creeping into his tone. But I suppose we can make it work. I'll email you all the project documentation tonight. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the phone, finally understanding the real reason I'd been exiled from Thanksgiving. Richard hadn't wanted me around his business associates because he was already planning this approach, already positioning me as the solution to his capital requirements. The apology, the concern for Hannah's feelings, the warm family reconciliation, it was all theater, all designed to soften me up for the real purpose of his call. What Richard didn't know was that I'd spent the 3 weeks since Thanksgiving doing some research of my own. And what I'd discovered about his business practices, his financial situation, and his pattern of using family connections for capital was far more interesting than he could have imagined. But I'd let him think his charm offensive was working. For now. The project documentation Richard emailed that evening was impressive. Professionally bound presentations with glossy renderings of gleaming skyscrapers, detailed financial projections showing astronomical returns, and official-looking letters from Denver city officials expressing enthusiasm for downtown revitalization. To anyone without experience in real estate development, it would have appeared legitimate, even exciting. But I'd spent 40 years married to Walter Bosch, who'd built his modest fortune by teaching me to read between the lines of financial documents. The red flags were everywhere once you knew what to look for. Still, I wasn't ready to reveal what I'd discovered. Instead, I decided to let Richard dig himself deeper while I gathered more information. 2 days later, Hannah called, her voice bright with manufactured excitement. "Mom, Richard told me about the development opportunity. Isn't it amazing? Connor and Marigold could have everything. The best schools, college funds, maybe even a vacation home in Aspen like the Montes." My daughter's voice carried that same desperate optimism I'd heard when she tried to convince herself that staying at the hotel had been a good idea. She was trying to sell herself on Richard's dream as much as she was trying to sell me. "It sounds very ambitious," I replied carefully. "Have you seen all the documentation? The contracts with the city, the investor agreements?" A slight pause. "Well, Richard handles all the business details. You know how these things are, so complicated with all the legal language. But he's explained everything to me, and it's such an incredible opportunity for our family's future." She hadn't seen the documents. Richard was managing her information just as carefully as he was managing mine. "Hannah, sweetheart, this is a very large financial commitment. I want to make sure I understand everything completely before making any decisions." "Of course, Mom. But Richard did mention that timing is important. These kinds of opportunities don't come around often, and if we wait too long..." The pressure campaign had begun, using Hannah as the messenger to avoid appearing too pushy himself. Over the next few days, the manipulation escalated with military precision. First came the casual mentions during phone calls. Hannah would be telling me about Connor's soccer practice, then suddenly segue into how excited the children were about the possibility of attending Denver Academy, the elite private school where all the development partners' children would be enrolled. Then Richard began including me in group text messages with Hannah, sharing updates about the project's progress. Photos of construction meetings, screenshots of glowing reviews from architectural firms, messages like "investor enthusiasm is through the roof." Lucky to be part of something this transformative. The most insidious manipulation, though, came through my grandchildren. During my weekly video call with Connor and Marigold, Connor suddenly announced, "Daddy says we might get to go to a special school with a swimming pool and horses." "Horses?" I asked, glancing at Hannah, who was visible in the background of the video call. "For the equestrian program," Marigold chimed in, her 5-year-old eyes wide with excitement. "And Daddy says we might get a bigger house with our own playroom." Hannah looked uncomfortable, but said nothing as the children chattered about ponies and playrooms, and all the wonderful things that would happen when Daddy's business makes lots of money. Richard had clearly been painting vivid pictures for the children about their upgraded lifestyle, creating expectations that would be crushed if the investment didn't materialize. It was emotional manipulation at its most calculated, using my love for Connor and Marigold to pressure me into funding Richard's ambitions. The campaign reached its crescendo on Thursday evening, one day before my self-imposed deadline for a decision. Richard called just as I was finishing dinner. "Martha, I wanted to give you one final update before tomorrow. The investor meeting went even better than expected. They're so impressed with our presentation that they're actually considering expanding the project scope." "That sounds positive," I said, though alarm bells were ringing. In my experience, expanding scope usually meant escalating costs. It is positive, but it does mean they want to see even stronger financial backing from the family partners. They've requested that co-signers demonstrate liquid assets of at least $4 million, not just the loan amount. $4 million. The requirement had somehow doubled overnight. "Richard, that's quite different from what we discussed. Are you saying the loan amount has increased?" No, the loan is still the same. They just want proof that the cosigner has substantial additional assets as security. It's standard practice in high-level development deals. Standard practice. Another phrase designed to make me feel naive for questioning the escalating demands. "I'll need to review this new information with my financial advisor," I said. "Of course, but Martha," his voice took on a more urgent tone, "I have to be honest with you. If we can't provide this documentation by Monday morning, we'll lose our position in the investor group. They have other development teams ready to step in." Monday morning. The deadline had suddenly moved up by 4 days. "Richard, these kinds of pressures and changing requirements make me very uncomfortable. Legitimate business opportunities don't typically operate with such aggressive timelines." "I understand your caution, Martha. I really do, but this is exactly how major real estate development works. Windows of opportunity open and close quickly. The families who get wealthy are the ones willing to act decisively when these chances arise." He paused, then played his final card. "Hannah is so excited about this, Martha. She's already been researching neighborhoods near Denver Academy, planning how we'll decorate the new house. Connor has been telling his friends about the equestrian program. I'd hate to have to disappoint them because we couldn't secure the necessary backing." There it was, the threat disguised as concern. "Make the investment, or be responsible for crushing your daughter's dreams and your grandchildren's expectations. I'll give you my answer tomorrow as planned," I said firmly. "Of course, though I hope you'll consider how much this means to your family's future." After hanging up, I sat in my living room and allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. Richard had no idea that his escalating manipulation was providing me with exactly the documentation I needed for what came next. Tomorrow's conversation was going to be very different from what he expected. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzly in Kansas City, matching my somber mood as I prepared for what I knew would be a conversation that changed everything. But before I called Richard with my decision, I had one more phone call to make, one that would reveal the secret I'd been keeping even from Hannah. I dialed the familiar number of Bosch & Associates Investment Management, the firm Walter had built from nothing over 35 years of careful, methodical wealth building. "Good morning, Mrs. Bosch," came the warm voice of Matthew Hammer, Walter's former business partner who'd taken over the firm after my husband's death. "I was wondering when you'd call. Are you ready to discuss the Reynolds situation?" 3 weeks ago, immediately after my humiliating Thanksgiving exile, I'd asked Matthew to conduct a thorough investigation into Richard's business activities. What we'd discovered was far more damaging than I'd initially suspected. "I'm ready, Matthew. Richard's expecting my answer this morning about co-signing his development loan." I think it's time he learned exactly who he's been dealing with. Matthew chuckled, a sound that held no warmth. Oh, this is going to be interesting. Should I start with his credit history or jump straight to the criminal background check? Criminal background check. My coffee mug paused halfway to my lips. Richard Reynolds has quite the colorful past, Martha. 3 lawsuits from previous business partners alleging fraud, 2 bankruptcy filings that he somehow managed to keep sealed, and a rather interesting investigation by the Colorado Attorney General's Office for Securities Violations. I set down my coffee with shaking hands. Securities violations. Apparently, our Mr. Reynolds has a pattern of selling investment opportunities that don't actually exist. The Denver Downtown Development Project? It's completely fictional, Martha. The City Planning Commission has no record of any such proposal. The investor groups he's been referencing consists of exactly one person, a convicted con artist named Tanner Monty, who's currently under federal investigation for wire fraud. The room seemed to tilt around me. Hannah was married to a criminal. My grandchildren were living with a man who made his living defrauding families like ours. Matthew, how long has this been going on? How many people has he victimized? Based on our investigation, at least 7 families over the past 5 years. Always the same pattern: marry into or befriend financially comfortable families, gain their trust through small requests, then escalate to major investment scams. The total documented theft is approaching $12 million. $12 million stolen from trusting families while Richard played the role of ambitious son-in-law and devoted husband. But here's where it gets really interesting, Martha, Matthew continued, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. Do you remember when Walter restructured your investment portfolio about 6 months before he died? I did remember. Walter had become unusually secretive about our finances in his final months, meeting frequently with Matthew and making changes he described only as protective measures for your future. Walter suspected something, Matthew explained. He'd been watching Richard's spending patterns versus his reported income, and the numbers didn't add up. So Walter did what Walter always did. He investigated thoroughly and prepared accordingly. My hands were trembling now as Matthew's words sank in. Martha, you're not just financially comfortable. When Walter restructured everything, he moved your assets into protected trusts and high-yield investments that have been performing exceptionally well. You're worth approximately $18 million. $18 million. I stared at my modest kitchen, at the simple furniture Walter and I had chosen together, at the life we'd built through careful saving and modest living, and tried to process this revelation. Walter knew Richard would eventually make a major play for family money, Matthew continued. He wanted to ensure you had the resources to protect yourself and Hannah when that moment came. He also wanted you to have enough financial power to fight back if necessary. Fight back. The phrase resonated through me like a bell tolling. Matthew, I need you to do something for me. I want you to purchase the mortgage on Hannah and Richard's house. Today if possible. Already done, Matthew replied with evident satisfaction. We acquired it from Denver First National 3 days ago when I realized Richard was moving toward his final con. We now hold the note on their $600,000 home, and according to our records they're currently 4 months behind on payments. 4 months behind. While Richard was pressuring me to co-sign a $3 million fake investment, he couldn't even make his house payments. There's more, Martha. Richard's been using Hannah's credit to finance his lifestyle. She has 3 credit cards maxed out that she doesn't know about, and he's taken a second mortgage on the house without her signature, which, by the way, constitutes bank fraud. My daughter was being systematically destroyed financially by the man she trusted most in the world. What about Hannah? How much does she know? Based on our investigation, Hannah knows virtually nothing about their true financial situation. Richard has been intercepting financial statements, hiding debt documents, and maintaining separate bank accounts. She believes they're struggling but stable. She has no idea they're on the brink of complete financial collapse. I thought about Hannah's strained voice during recent phone calls, her desperate enthusiasm for Richard's opportunities, her willingness to pressure me for the investment. She wasn't complicit, she was another victim. Matthew, I want you to prepare a complete dossier on Richard's activities. Legal documentation, financial records, everything. And I want you to contact our attorney about the best way to protect Hannah and the children when this comes to light. Already in progress. Thomas Chen is standing by for your call. Thomas Chen, Walter's longtime friend and our family attorney, the man who'd helped structure the trusts that were protecting my assets. One more thing, Matthew. When Richard calls me this morning expecting my answer about the co-signing, I want to be prepared to make him a counteroffer he'll never forget. What kind of counteroffer? I smiled, feeling Walter's protective presence surrounding me like armor. I'm going to offer to buy his fake development project myself. For cash. Let's see how he explains why that won't work. Matthew's delighted laughter filled my kitchen. Martha Bosch, you're going to enjoy this conversation immensely. For the first time in weeks, I felt powerful instead of manipulated. Richard had no idea what was coming. At exactly 10 o'clock Friday morning, my phone rang. Richard's name appeared on the screen, and I could practically hear the anticipation in his voice before I even answered. Martha, perfect timing. I was just finishing up the final paperwork for the investor meeting. Please tell me you have good news for us. His confidence was palpable. He'd orchestrated the perfect storm of pressure, family guilt, artificial deadlines, dreams for the grandchildren, and Hannah's unwitting participation in the manipulation. In his mind, I was cornered with no choice but to comply. Richard, I've given your proposal very careful consideration, I began, settling into my favorite armchair with my coffee. And I do have an answer for you. Excellent. I knew you'd see what an incredible opportunity this is for the whole family. Hannah is going to be so relieved. She's been worried that we might miss out on Richard. I interrupted gently but firmly. My answer is no. The silence that followed was so complete I wondered if the call had dropped. When Richard finally spoke, his voice had lost all its practiced warmth. I'm sorry, what did you say? I said no. I will not be co-signing your investment loan. But Martha, surely you understand what this means for Connor and Marigold's future. The educational opportunities, the Richard stop, my voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it that surprised even me. I understand exactly what this means. What I'm curious about is whether you understand what your proposal actually entails. Another pause, this one edged with wariness. I'm not sure what you mean. I mean that you've asked me to guarantee a loan for nearly $3 million based on a development project that, according to my research, doesn't actually exist. The silence this time was deafening. I could almost hear the gears turning in Richard's mind as he tried to calculate how much I'd discovered and how to respond. Martha, I think there might be some confusion. The project documentation I sent you was very impressive, I agreed. Professional graphics, official-looking letterhead, detailed financial projections. Someone put considerable effort into creating those fake documents. Fake? His voice cracked slightly on the word. Martha, I don't know where you're getting your information, but from the Denver City Planning Commission, I said matter-of-factly. They have no record of any development proposal matching your project description. I also spoke with Denver First National Bank, who confirmed that no such investor group has approached them about construction financing. I let that sink in for a moment before continuing. But here's what I find most interesting, Richard. You've been using this fictional investment opportunity to pressure me for money while you're currently 4 months behind on your mortgage payments. That suggests either remarkably poor financial planning or something more deliberate. Now wait, just a minute. Richard's voice was rising, the careful control beginning to slip. I'm not finished, I said firmly. I also discovered some fascinating information about your previous business partnerships. 7 families, Richard. 7 families who trusted you with their savings for investment opportunities that somehow never materialized. The sound of Richard's breathing was harsh through the phone. When he spoke again, his voice was low and dangerous. I don't know what lies you've been listening to, but court records aren't lies, Richard. Neither are bankruptcy filings or attorney general investigations. The pattern is quite clear once you know what to look for. You have no idea what you're talking about, he snarled, all pretense of charm abandoned now. Those situations were completely different. Business partnerships gone wrong, not fraud, perhaps. But what I know for certain is that I will not be providing you with access to my assets for any reason. Not for fictional development projects, not for house payments, not for private school tuition, and not for maintaining the lifestyle you've built on other people's money. Other people's money. Richard's voice was venomous now. You mean your money. The money you've been hoarding while your own daughter struggles to make ends meet. There it was, the entitlement that had been lurking beneath his polished surface all along. My daughter struggles to make ends meet because her husband has been systematically hiding debt from her while living beyond their means. That's not my responsibility to fix, Richard. That's yours. You selfish old woman, he spat, his mask completely gone now. Hannah deserves better than a mother who puts her bank account ahead of her family's future. Hannah deserves better than a husband who commits fraud, I replied calmly. She also deserves to know the truth about your financial deceptions. You wouldn't dare tell her, Richard said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. She'd never believe you over me. Perhaps. But I suspect she might be interested in seeing the documentation I've gathered. Bank records showing the hidden credit cards, mortgage statements she's never seen, court filings from your previous victims. Those aren't. You can't prove, Richard. I interrupted, my voice carrying a note of finality that brooked no argument. This conversation is over. You will not contact me again about investments, loans, or any other financial schemes. If you do, I'll be sharing my research with Hannah, with the Colorado Attorney General's office, and with anyone else who might find it interesting. You're making a huge mistake, Richard said, his voice shaking with rage. If you think you can interfere in my marriage, in my family, your family includes my daughter and my grandchildren, I reminded him. And I will do whatever is necessary to protect them, including protecting them from you. I hung up the phone and sat in the sudden silence of my kitchen, my hands surprisingly steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. For the first time in 8 years, I had drawn a clear, unmistakable line with Richard Reynolds. No more polite compliance, no more family harmony purchased with my financial support. No more enabling his manipulation of my daughter. The phone rang again immediately. Richard's name on the screen. I declined the call and turned off my phone. The real work was just beginning. I knew Richard wouldn't take my refusal quietly, but I underestimated how quickly he would escalate to full warfare. By Saturday afternoon, barely 24 hours after our confrontation, Hannah was calling me in tears. Mom, what did you say to Richard? Her voice was thick with emotion, confusion evident in every word. He's saying terrible things about you, about how you've been lying to us about money, about how you don't really care about Connor and Marigold's future. I closed my eyes, feeling a familiar ache in my chest. Richard was doing exactly what manipulators do when their schemes fail. Turn the victim's loved ones against anyone who threatens to expose the truth. Hannah, sweetheart, what exactly did Richard tell you? He said you've been hiding money from us, that you could easily afford to help with the development investment, but you're choosing not to because you're selfish and bitter. Her voice cracked. He said you've never approved of him, and this is your way of sabotaging our family's future. The calculated cruelty of it took my breath away. Richard was rewriting our entire history, casting himself as the victim of my supposed prejudice, while painting me as the villain withholding help from my own family. Hannah, did Richard show you the documentation for this development project? The contracts, the city approvals, any official paperwork? He said those are confidential business documents that can't be shared outside the investor group. But Mom, he's so upset. I've never seen him like this. He spent all night pacing around the house, making phone calls, saying his whole career is ruined because his own family won't support him. My heart broke for my daughter, caught in the middle of something she couldn't possibly understand. But I also felt a flicker of satisfaction. Richard's desperation was making him sloppy, revealing the volatile temperament he'd kept hidden beneath his charming facade. Has he explained why this opportunity suddenly has such tight deadlines? I asked gently. Why legitimate investors would require family co-signers to commit millions of dollars with only days to decide. He said that's how big business works, Hannah replied, but doubt was creeping into her voice. That opportunities like this don't wait for people who can't make quick decisions. Before I could respond, I heard Richard's voice in the background, sharp and commanding. Hannah, who are you talking to? You'd better not be calling your mother behind my back. It's Mom, Hannah said, and I could hear the defensive edge in her tone. She's trying to explain. Give me the phone. Richard's voice was getting closer. I'll explain things to her myself. Richard, please don't. The phone was apparently snatched away, because suddenly Richard's voice was in my ear, no longer bothering with even a pretense of civility. You vindictive old bitch, he snarled. You think you can destroy my family because you're jealous of what I've built? You think you can turn my wife against me with your lies? The verbal assault was so sudden, so vicious, that for a moment I was speechless. This was the man Hannah had married, the father of my grandchildren, dropping all pretense and revealing the rage that had been simmering beneath his polished surface. Richard, Hannah can hear you. I don't care what Hannah hears, he screamed. She needs to understand what kind of person her mother really is. A bitter, lonely widow who can't stand seeing her daughter happy. In the background, I could hear Hannah's shocked gasp. Whatever she'd expected from this confrontation, it wasn't her husband's complete psychological breakdown. You had your chance to be part of this family's success, Richard continued, his voice shaking with fury. Instead, you chose to sabotage us. Well, congratulations, Martha. You've just lost your daughter and grandchildren forever. Richard, calm down, I heard Hannah plead. Please, you're scaring me. Don't tell me to calm down, he roared, apparently turning on her now. Your mother just destroyed our future, and you're worried about me being scared. This is your fault too, Hannah. You should have convinced her. You should have made her understand how important this was. The sound of Hannah beginning to cry was audible through the phone. Richard had shifted from charming manipulator to emotional abuser in the span of a single phone call, and my daughter was witnessing it all. You want to know the truth about your precious mother? Richard's voice was back in the phone, toxic with venom. She's been playing games with us for years. Acting poor, acting like she can barely afford to help, when she's probably sitting on millions. Well, I'm done being nice about it. What are you talking about? I could hear Hannah asking weakly. Your mother isn't the struggling widow she pretends to be. Richard spat. Walter left her with more money than she's ever admitted. She could solve all our problems with a signature, but she'd rather watch us lose our house than lift a finger to help her own daughter. The accusation hung in the air like poison. Richard was gambling everything on this attack, betting that Hannah would believe his version of events, rather than questioning why he was so desperate for money if his business was truly successful. "Hannah," I said quietly, knowing she could hear me, "ask him to show you the bank statements. Ask him to explain why you need a co-signer if the project is guaranteed to succeed." "Shut up," Richard screamed. "Don't you dare try to confuse her with your manipulative questions." But the damage was done. I could hear it in the sudden silence from Hannah's end of the call. Richard's explosion had revealed far more about his character than any evidence I could have presented. "I think," I said calmly, "Hannah has heard enough to make her own judgments about who's being manipulative here." The line went dead, but the real reckoning was just beginning. The fallout from Richard's explosive phone call was swift and revealing. Within hours, Hannah called me back, her voice subdued but determined. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." She took a shaky breath. "Do you have more money than you've told us about?" I could hear Connor and Marigold playing in the background, their innocent laughter a stark contrast to the serious conversation their mother and grandmother were having. "Yes, sweetheart, I do." A long pause. "How much more?" "Significantly more. Your father was very good with investments, and he made some arrangements before he died to ensure I'd be financially secure. Why didn't you tell me?" Her voice wasn't accusatory, just tired and confused. "Because your father was worried about Richard's intentions. He wanted to protect our family's assets until we better understood Richard's character and motivations." Another pause, longer this time. "Dad was right to worry, wasn't he?" The pain in her voice nearly broke my heart. "Yes, Hannah, I'm afraid he was." Over the next hour, Hannah told me about the discovery she'd made after Richard's outburst. Shaken by his violent reaction, she'd gone through their home office while he was out meeting with investors to calm down. What she found confirmed my worst fears about Richard's deception. Hidden credit card statements showing debts totaling over $80,000. Bank notices about missed mortgage payments. Legal documents that Hannah had never seen, including a second mortgage on their house that somehow bore her forged signature. Most damning of all, a folder labeled Prospect Research containing detailed financial profiles of wealthy families in Denver, including documentation about my own assets that was far more comprehensive than anything Richard should have had access to. "He's been researching your finances for months, Mom," Hannah said, her voice hollow. "There are notes about Dad's investment history, estimates of your net worth, even a timeline of when he planned to approach you for different amounts of money." Richard hadn't just been opportunistically exploiting family relationships, he'd been conducting systematic financial surveillance, treating his own in-laws as marks in an elaborate con game. "Hannah, I need you to listen carefully. You and the children aren't safe there anymore. Richard's desperation is going to make him increasingly unpredictable." "I know," she whispered. "After you hung up, he came back ranting about how this was all your fault, how he was going to make you pay for ruining his deal. Then he started making phone calls to people, saying things about other options and alternative approaches." The implication sent ice through my veins. Richard was clearly plotting some form of retaliation. "Where is he now?" "He left an hour ago. Said he had to meet with his business associates about damage control." "Mom, I'm scared. The children keep asking why Daddy was yelling, and I don't know what to tell them." "Pack a bag for you and the children," I said firmly. "Drive to Kansas City tonight. We'll sort everything else out tomorrow." I can't just leave. Hannah, trust me on this. Richard's behavior is escalating beyond financial manipulation now. You need to get the children somewhere safe while we figure out our next steps. As we spoke, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Your daughter will regret what you've done to this family. Some mistakes can't be fixed. Richard wasn't finished with us. In fact, he was just getting started.
Hannah arrived at my Kansas City home that night with 2 terrified children, 3 hastily packed suitcases, and a shell-shocked expression that broke my heart. Connor and Marigold clung to me in my foyer, confused about why they'd left Daddy behind, and why Mommy had been crying during the entire 8-hour drive. "Grandma Martha, are we having a sleepover?" Marigold asked, her small voice uncertain. "Something like that, sweetheart," I replied, smoothing her hair. "We're going to have a nice long visit while Mommy and I take care of some grown-up things." While Hannah got the children settled in the guest rooms, I made the phone calls I'd been preparing for since Richard's first threatening text. Matthew Hammer arrived within the hour, followed by Thomas Chen, our family attorney, and Detective Eva Monti from the Kansas City Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit, a contact Thomas had recommended, given the escalating nature of Richard's behavior. "Mrs. Bosch," Detective Monti said, as we gathered in my living room, "I've reviewed the documentation your attorney provided. This pattern of behavior suggests Mr. Reynolds may be planning something more aggressive than simple harassment." She showed us printouts of social media posts Richard had made throughout the evening, each one more unhinged than the last. Photos of Hannah and the children with captions like, "When family betrays you, you do what's necessary to protect what's yours." Cryptic references to teaching lessons about loyalty and making sure everyone understands the consequences of their choices. "He's creating a narrative," Detective Monti explained, positioning himself as the wronged party to justify whatever action he's planning next. Thomas leaned forward, his expression grim. "Martha, I need to ask directly, given your financial position, are you concerned Richard might attempt some form of extortion or coercion?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. Richard's name appeared on the screen. "Put it on speaker," Detective Monti instructed. "And let him talk. We need to document his current state of mind." I answered the call with a calm, "Hello, Richard. You think you're so smart, don't you, Martha?" His voice was slurred slightly. "Alcohol, most likely. Turning my wife against me, stealing my children, destroying my business opportunities. Richard, you're intoxicated. Perhaps you should. Don't tell me what I should do," he screamed. "You want to play games with my family's future? Fine. Let's see how you like it when I start sharing some interesting information about your precious Walter's business practices." The threat was empty. Walter had been scrupulously honest in all his dealings, but it revealed Richard's willingness to attack my late husband's reputation out of spite. "What do you want, Richard?" I asked, following Detective Monti's signal to keep him talking. "I want what's mine, Hannah, my children, and enough money to rebuild what you destroyed. $50 million, Martha. Wire transferred to an offshore account by Monday morning, or I start making some very public accusations about tax evasion and fraud." The audacity was breathtaking. Richard was attempting to extort me for nearly 3 times what I was actually worth, using threats against Walter's memory as leverage. "And if I refuse, then you'll discover that losing your family was just the beginning of your problems." The call ended, leaving us in heavy silence. Detective Monti was already reaching for her radio. "We need a protection detail on this house," she said, "and I want Mr. Reynolds brought in for questioning immediately." The gloves were officially off. Monday morning arrived with crisp December air, and the sound of police cars in my driveway. Richard had been arrested Sunday evening at a Denver hotel bar, drunk and belligerent, after making increasingly threatening phone calls to my neighbors and Hannah's former co-workers.
Detective Monty called to inform me that he was being held on charges of extortion, harassment, and fraud. But the real surprise came when Matthew Hammer arrived at my house with a briefcase full of documents and a satisfied smile that told me he'd been busy over the weekend. "Martha, it's time for the final reveal," he said, settling at my kitchen table where Hannah sat nursing her third cup of coffee. Connor and Marigold were in the living room, blissfully unaware of the adult drama unfolding around them, watching cartoons and eating the pancakes I'd made to maintain some sense of normalcy. "Hannah," I said gently, "there are some things you need to know about our family's financial situation. Things your father wanted to protect you from, until it became necessary." Matthew opened his briefcase and spread out documents across the table: bank statements, investment portfolios, property deeds, and business incorporation papers that made Hannah's eyes widen with each revelation. "Your mother isn't just financially comfortable, Hannah," Matthew explained. "She's one of the wealthiest women in Kansas City. Walter built an investment empire over 35 years, and when he died, everything was structured to protect Martha from exactly the kind of predator Richard turned out to be." Hannah stared at the papers, her coffee growing cold as she processed the magnitude of what she was seeing. "Mom, this says you own the investment firm that holds our mortgage." "That's correct," I replied calmly. "We purchased it 3 weeks ago when we realized Richard was months behind on payments and planning to use your house as collateral for his fake investment scheme." "But that means," Hannah's voice trailed off as understanding dawned. "It means your mother owns your house," Matthew finished. "It also means she owns the building where Richard's business office is located, the country club where he networks, and the private school Connor was supposed to attend with the development money." The irony was delicious. Richard had spent months researching my assets and planning to exploit family connections, never realizing that his research had been laughably incomplete. While he'd been scheming to access what he thought was a modest widow's savings, I'd been quietly acquiring the very infrastructure of his fraudulent lifestyle. "There's more," Matthew continued, clearly enjoying himself. "Martha, do you want to tell her about the Tanner Monty situation?" I smiled, remembering the phone call I'd made Saturday morning while Hannah was getting the children settled. Richard's investor partner, the convicted con artist he's been working with. It turns out he was very interested in providing testimony about Richard's activities in exchange for a reduced sentence on his own federal charges. Hannah's hand flew to her mouth. "He's been working with a convicted criminal." A convicted criminal who kept very detailed records of Richard's previous schemes, including recordings of phone calls where Richard discussed targeting wealthy families through marriage and family relationships. The color drained from Hannah's face as the full scope of Richard's deception became clear. She wasn't just married to a financial manipulator, she'd been the unwitting bait in an elaborate long-term con designed to access my family's wealth. "Hannah," I said softly, reaching across the table to take her hand, "your father saw this coming years ago. Everything he did was to protect you and the children from Richard's true nature." She began to cry then, tears of relief and grief and anger all mixed together. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I almost let him destroy everything Dad worked for." "You have nothing to apologize for, sweetheart. You loved your husband and trusted him, as you should have been able to do." From the living room came the sound of Connor's laughter as Marigold performed her latest dance creation for him. "What happens now?" Hannah asked quietly. "Now," I said, smiling as I watched my grandchildren play, "we build something real." 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of Hannah's new home, a comfortable 4-bedroom colonial in a quiet Kansas City neighborhood, just 15 minutes from my house. The morning sun streamed through windows that overlooked a backyard where Connor was teaching Marigold how to properly throw a baseball, their laughter carrying on the spring breeze. "Mom, the real estate agent called," Hannah said, hanging up her phone with a smile. The Denver house finally sold. Even after paying off all of Richard's hidden debts, there's enough left for Connor and Marigold's college funds. I nodded, stirring the pancake batter for our traditional Saturday morning breakfast. Hannah had taken a marketing position with Matthew's investment firm, using her skills to help other families protect their assets from financial predators. The work gave her purpose and helped her heal from the betrayal she'd endured. Any word from Richard's attorney? I asked. Plea agreement was finalized yesterday. 5 years federal prison, full restitution to his previous victims, and supervised probation afterward. Hannah's voice was steady now, no longer carrying the pain and confusion that had marked those first terrible weeks. Thomas says the restraining order will remain in effect throughout his sentence. Connor burst through the back door, grass stains on his knees and dirt under his fingernails. Grandma Martha. Marigold hit the ball all the way to the fence. Did she now? I ruffled his hair, marveling at how resilient children could be when given love and stability. Hannah wrapped her arms around both children, her face peaceful in a way I hadn't seen since before her marriage to Richard. Who's ready for pancakes? As we gathered around the kitchen table, Connor chattering about baseball and Marigold showing off her latest drawing, I felt Walter's presence surrounding us like a warm embrace. His careful planning had protected more than money. It had protected our family's future, our children's innocence, and most importantly, our ability to choose love over manipulation, authenticity over appearances. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well, and we were living very well indeed.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.